welcome to my June wrap up. The month isn't quite over yet. I'm pre-recording this a couple of days before July begins because I'm leaving town on July 1st. But I also want to mention that I did a mid-month check-in video this month. And so I will be talking about a lot of books I mentioned in that video. But in order not to be too redundant, I am going to offer some more expanded thoughts on those books, or just some different thoughts than I did in the previous video. But I'll try to leave a timestamp below in case you want to skip that part and go right into some other books that I'm going to mention in this video. But the first book I have to mention, I did already talk at length about, and that is To Ride Hell's Chasm by Jenny Wirtz. So of course I've talked about this in my mid-month update. I talked about this over on Philip's channel with Philip Chase, Jenny Wirtz and Blaze, and I talked about this in my mid-year freakout tag. So I've been gushing about this all over the place. I love this book. But one thing I didn't mention on my channel, I think, as much, is that there are horses in this story and other magical creatures. I feel ashamed that I didn't mention that because I was talking about this book with my friend Ola from the channel Wild Witch, and she got after me about that. She said, "Why didn't you mention there are horses in the story?" So there are horses in the story. She loves horses, and if you do too, that might be something to consider. Also, Jenny did the incredible artwork to the cover. And something else, I did mention a lot about the prose in previous videos, but I just want to say that Jenny herself said that she wrote in a way in which she wanted people to slow down, because sometimes slowing down allows the most impactful experiences to occur. And I quite agree with that. So it does require some active reading, I think, on the part of the reader, but I quite enjoy that. So if that appeals to you, then you might want to pick this up. But if you're somebody who just kind of likes to blaze through stories and just not have to do that, then maybe this isn't the right book or the right time for you, that kind of thing. So all things to consider, but I loved this book, obviously. And then the next book to mention here, actually I want to mention two side by side, and that is Fight Club and Beautiful World, Where Are You by Sally Rooney. And I'm mentioning these two books side by side. I did try to explain this in my mid-month update, but I'm not sure I really got the point across I wanted to get. And that is that I didn't relate to characters in either of these books. And so this leads me to a question I want to ask you all. Do you need to relate to characters in order to enjoy a story? Because in the case of Fight Club, I didn't enjoy that story, but I don't think it was because I couldn't relate to the characters. I think I didn't enjoy Fight Club because I have negative associations with that time in culture and with that time in music history, all that stuff. So it didn't help having those negative memories and associations with that book. Why read it? Because it was gifted to me, and I did want to try to open my mind to it, but it was something I found I just couldn't get past at the same time. I still think that the author did a good job at writing the story he wanted to write. I thought it was well constructed. I think it worked. Honestly, it worked for what it was. It just wasn't for me because of those negative associations. Now, as for Beautiful World, Where Are You? I also did not relate with any of those characters, and yet I really enjoyed their explorations on creating meaning out of their lives, understanding what intimacy meant to them, especially as they did not identify with a lot of the conventions and traditions that they grew up with regarding religion and marriage and that kind of thing. So I found that really interesting. Another thing to mention is that there is a interesting relationship dynamic that I know is not going to work for certain people, and that is that there's a couple in the book that grew up together. There's a slight age gap, I think like 4 to 7 years. The male is the older person, and they don't act upon their romantic feelings when young, but later in life, they reflect on how they always had kind of a father-daughter type of dynamic that followed them into adulthood and into their relationship as adults, and even their friends commented on it. It seemed a little weird, but it didn't bother me, I think, because the characters themselves were aware of it. It wasn't until later after finishing the book that I thought back on it and I thought, huh, that was kind of weird. And I don't know, I haven't really watched anybody's in-depth review about the book and learned what people thought about that specific dynamic, but I'm going to imagine some people probably didn't like it. I don't know, but I just feel like I should go ahead and mention that. So anyway, Again, I'm bringing up these two books side by side, Fight Club and Beautiful World, Where Are You? Because I couldn't relate to the characters. I didn't enjoy one because of negative associations, not because I couldn't relate to it. And not because I'm female. I know I got that comment, and I thought that was kind of funny because most of the people I know who love Fight Club are actually female. Again, I think Beautiful World, Where Are You? I would describe that as more existential, whereas Fight Club I would describe as more nihilistic. I don't have a problem exploring nihilism, but again, it's just that time in pop culture history I don't like. And so I have no problems breaking the first rule of Fight Club. I got so sick of hearing people talk about that when I was younger. Another book I mentioned in my mid-month update is Boy's Life. I still haven't finished that. I get audiobook slumps now and then. I don't know what causes them. It just makes me not want to listen to audiobooks. But I am enjoying it when I do listen to it. I feel like the author has done an incredible job so far of capturing the 1960s in Alabama. He captures a lot of the dark tones of that time. So it's important to know that going in, but I think he does that to portray an authentic picture of that time. It's not comfortable. There are a lot of weird things that happen. There's a very dark humor throughout the book so far. So I am really enjoying it. I think the narrator is really good too. I just, for whatever reason, haven't quite been in the mood for audiobooks. So eventually I'll get through it. I don't want to rush through it just to have the book done by the end of June. I don't want to do that. I'd rather be able to absorb the book at my own rate. So it might be a while, but we'll see how that goes. I forgot to mention that I finished The Wind Through the Keyhole, book 4.5 in the Dark Tower series. I don't know what's wrong with me that I keep forgetting to mention this because I finished that actually at the beginning of the month and went out of publication order against the guidance of Scott, Bald Booktuber. Publication order always, Scott. But I did quite enjoy it, even though it was a rough start. It is kind of a story within a story within a story. And there is a wonderful theme of mother-son relationships as well as the theme of forgiveness, which was quite touching. I liked it more and more as I read on, though it wasn't quite a favorite in the Dark Tower series. I think it does place itself really well after Wizard and Glass personally, though I can't speak to whether it would be better to read the whole series first. So I just want to go ahead and mention that here. I did pick up a palette cleanser in the month of June, and that is Vinland Saga Volume 4. Now, if you love Vikings, if you love maps, and if you love great character work and twists and politics, all of that stuff, you've got to check out this manga. It's incredible. It's the best I've ever read. And granted, I haven't read a lot of manga. This is just way surpassing my expectations of what manga can do. I did try out the first episode of the anime, even though it was beautifully done. I preferred the manga because the manga does something different with the timeline and how it presents information. It seemed to me as though the anime tries to go towards a more linear timeline, and I quite prefer the way it's done in the manga personally. The sad thing about this though is that I think this is where my journey ends after volume 4 because my library doesn't carry any more of these volumes, and that's the whole interlibrary loan system where I live. They only carry up to volume 4, and I'm so crushed because I love this manga. I love, again, how the author breaks the third wall in the middle of the books, in the middle of the volumes, and he talks about what he wonders about when it comes to Vikings. I love the way maps are presented in here again, and I think they're pretty accurate. I'm going to guess. It seems like this is very well researched, and you even learn some Norse terminology when you read these manga. I remember that kind of coming in handy whenever I picked up John Gwynn's The Shadow of the Gods earlier this year, having read the first volume of Vinland Saga. So again, I recommend this, especially if you love Vikings, and I'm crushed that I can't get any more of these through my library because I think it would be quite expensive to start collecting them from volume 5 on. But if you can get them through the library, I say that's the way to go. Highly recommend. Love Vinland Saga. Great palette cleanser, by the way. Also, in the month of June, I finished Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. I loved this book. I had a wonderful live discussion on this book on my channel with Jimmy from the Fantasy Network. Derry from Derry's read it before. Jimmy and Derry have read the whole realm of the Elderlings, so it was wonderful to hear their reflections on Fitz and how this trilogy fits into the whole of the realm of the Elderlings. I also had Theo from Rekindled Reader and Alex from Tall Guy Reads two channels I recently mentioned in new or new to me channels I'm loving right now, and they were wonderful. It just so happened we were all reading the trilogy at the same time, totally unplanned. And so I thought, hey, why not discuss it together? So it was wonderful to have them on the channel to discuss this book. And one thing we talked about was how Robin Hobb does something very unique with this book versus the other two books in the trilogy. I think each book in the trilogy is incredibly unique, and I love when authors do that. I think that's something I'm noticing about myself. I love it when authors take a risk to do something totally different with different books in a series instead of giving you the same exact structure or format or whatever. I know that Robin Hobb is often referred to as a slow paced, slow burn author, especially with Farseer. I would agree with that. It did take me a long time to get through this book for various reasons, but I would say that it's valid to say that the pacing is slow. However, a lot happens actually, even though the pacing is considered slow. It's kind of weird because I felt that way when I was reading it, but then when I looked back, there were so many interesting layers to the story, so many interesting, complex themes regarding relationships and love and memory and wonderful aspects of to the magic and the world building that reflected, I think, some of those themes too. So I just love all those layers there. I quite enjoyed reflecting back and comparing and contrasting certain things that happened with the characters. And so if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts, obviously I talked at length along with the others on that live chat, so definitely check it out. But love Robin Hobb's writing, loved this book, so happy I completed the Farseer trilogy. One thing that maybe affected my reading experience, it did take me a long time to get through this book, as I mentioned, is that, as I mentioned in my mid-month update, I did get my prescription updated for my glasses, and that did affect my sight quite a bit. Fatigued my eyes quite a bit, adjusting. It takes several weeks apparently to adjust. That was hard for reading for me. I did notice a blurry spot in my right lens, which also kind of distracted me when I was reading quite a bit. And as far as pacing is concerned and vision is concerned, I feel like that's a really good transition to talk about the video I did recently on do you visualize what you read? I was completely surprised by the responses to that video. Thank you so much. I learned so much after doing that video from you all. So for one, I knew about aphantasia a little bit. I had seen this condition in a documentary many years ago of a man who had an extreme case of that and was unable to recognize his own children. They had to tell him who they were because he couldn't keep a memory recognition of their face. And so that can be pretty extreme, but it seems like there's a huge spectrum of aphantasia, and there are probably quite a few people who have it, at least on the light side of the spectrum, from what I can tell, and from all the comments I received of people who said that they really can't visualize what they read, or they know somebody who can't visualize what they read. And I received a wonderful link. Actually, my friend Ola sent me this link from Wild Witch. She sent me a link to Julie from Pages and Pens, who talked about her experience with aphantasia as both an author and a reader. So I'll link that video below. It's amazing. I guess this was a hot topic back when she presented it on Twitter a while back, and I kind of reopened that because a lot of people were like me and said in the comment section they had no idea people weren't visualizing what they read. And then the other half of people saying, I thought that when people said books are like a movie in my mind, that it was just a figure of speech. Like they were surprised people actually visualize what they read. So it's just interesting that we're all having different experiences. And I think when it comes to being unable to visualize what you read, there are probably, like I said, there's a huge spectrum and probably a lot of variation at any one point on the spectrum. So whereas Julie from Pages and Pens talked about her experience and said that as a result of that, setting doesn't matter to her. Descriptions of settings and things like that, just they're lost on her. However, she, as a reader, attends to characters and what characters are going through, empathizing with character emotions and experiences. Whereas my friend Stacy, in the comment section of my video, which I pinned her comment because it was so well written. She actually explained already to me that she's not a character-driven reader. She never really attends much to characters as somebody who doesn't visualize what she reads. She attends to plot. So the feelings of intensity with the plot are what drives her reading experience. And as a result, she really does struggle with her perception of pacing when there's a lot of description of the world and that kind of thing. So I feel like that was really illuminating for me to learn about that because I think perception of pacing it varies from person to person. I think again, depending on what you're attending to, and even if you are somebody who visualizes what you read, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you get a lot of description of world building or a lot of description of character work, that that's necessarily going to appeal to you. Because again, even among visual readers, we put different weight on different things that we're attending to, even with visual descriptions or non-visual descriptions. So there are so many variations on what we attend to as readers, and I guess that's my big takeaway. And I just feel like that's so important to consider when watching reviews or listening to different people's thoughts or experiences with books. So, just wanted to mention that. There's probably a lot more to say on it, but that is all for now. Last thing I'll leave you with is that I did start today, this morning. I started Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, which I'm buddy reading with Stacy, who I just mentioned, and her boyfriend Jake, bookish drummer. Very excited to get into this because I really loved The Lives of Locke Lamora. And I mentioned in a video on nautical fantasy I want to read. This was on my list. So I'm enjoying it so far. So we'll see where it goes. And that is all for now. Please let me know your thoughts on any of my thoughts I shared here or what you've been reading, or say hi if you want to say hi. I just love to get your comments. And thanks again if you left a comment on any of the previous videos I mentioned. I really appreciate them. So have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.